Hello friends, in this video I'm going to explain about what is exception, when would exception occur, how do you handle them. Handling the exception is called exception handling. The exception is basically the termination of the flow of your program. When you are trying to run your application, all of the sudden something happens. Those are called interruption. Your program get interrupted with something. Those are the exception. This type of interruption happens that something is under your control, something that is not under your control. The one example which is not under your control are called errors. You are trying to run your application or run your test or any program. All of the sudden you get no more memory, right? So there's no memory, no heap memory found. JVM throws those errors. Those type of thing is not under your control. You will fix them as it occurs, but you won't know beforehand. Sometimes there's no network, you're running application, system goes down, system crashes. These things has nothing to do with your code. These things happens without your control. Those are also considered to be errors. We handle error differently. We don't handle errors with the code. Handling codes are exception handling, the one that is under your control. Exception handling is very important for you to understand, and if you are trying to go into any job interviews, this is one of the most important questions that you will be asked during the interviews. Exceptions are of two kinds: checked exceptions, unchecked exceptions. When you write a code into the IDE like Eclipse, and you are writing the code and all of the sudden your compiler, there's a red error. When you hover there, it is giving you options to throw the exception. These are the exceptions that you can never get away with. You have to handle them immediately. Without handling, the compiler will never let you go. You cannot run that program. It is basically the error. Those are called checked exceptions, which you will have to handle. Handling the checked exceptions are of two kinds. One you can handle with throws. Using throws you can handle the exception, which means you are throwing the exception if something happens, or you can handle them by try catch block. Try catch block could be something that you don't want to interrupt the program and could just handle them. When anything happens, you are handling them. You are defining your own way of handling those issues, rather throwing the stack trace. Stack trace is all red errors, and whatever you see, those are not much of the message that it gives to the user. You are handling these errors under your way. Okay, those are the ones called handling exceptions. Now other one is the throws exception. You basically just wanted to terminate the program. If something happens, just terminate the program as the standard way. You can simply use throws exception. This exception can happen like you are entering some bad value in your program. You are trying to calculate the value with string and number. You are trying to calculate United States plus 5. You are trying to calculate string with a number, something silly thing. Or you are trying to you are writing the program that is looking for some some file and then looking for some value in the file, but it could not locate the file. You may have given the wrong file name or wrong path. You're trying to compare with something that is already throwing the null value, null pointer exception. All these kinds of values are kind of value related. These errors can happen. There are some exceptions, that is unchecked exceptions. Unchecked exceptions are like the array index out of bound exception. These are the exceptions that happens during the runtime exception. Checked exceptions are happening during the compile time exception. Compile time exception are the ones we just talked about. You handle them with the try catch block or throws. Unchecked exceptions are like null pointer exception or array index out of bound exception. Array index is like you have array with a size of 5, length of 5. Array has a length. Your array has a length of 5, but you are asking like 6th length of array value to be printed. Then it is saying that, okay, I don't find the 6th array. You only define me 5th array, but you're looking for something from 6th array which has never been defined. So it says array index out of an exception. Those are the ones you'd have to define and understand clearly. So you have, let's do the recap. Exception happens when something abruptly terminates or interrupts the flow of the program. This thing may happen, interruption may happen with all different factors, like entering the wrong value, giving the bad logic, bad part of the coding, or it could be something that your network gets terminated or application crashes. There's some hardware failures, like those are called errors. Or it could be something that your program fails during the runtime, not the compile time, which means when you run the program, before you run, JRE compiles the code. During the compiling, JRE figures out, okay, there's something error, you have to handle them before I can proceed. Those are the ones called checked exception. Example of checked exception is IO exception. IO exception is when you're writing some method, but you are trying to access the file system, file input stream. Then compiler will say, hey, you need to define some exception here to handle them. Those are the ones called, those type of exception being handled are IO exception, input output exception. We also have unchecked exception that happens during the runtime. Runtime means the JRE, like whenever you run the application, compiler do not find them, but as you run, your logic is the ones that defines. At that time it will find something that is looking unexpectedly from your code and it breaks. Those reasons are called exception during runtime. So you can handle both of the exception. Some of the exception that you have to handle, other exception you can let it go. But in the reality, if anything that you think is going to throw exception, regardless checked or unchecked, the standard is you have to define them, you have to handle them. If you think at some point it may throw the exception, you have to handle them. That's called standard coding practice. There are two ways you want to handle the exception. One is with the try catch block. This is called surrounding with a try catch block. Here you have a try, you have a catch. Try block, you would write the code, you write your logic that says you want to try something out. If that trying something that fails, okay, then and do something for me. That something is the part of the exception block. On the catch exception never gets triggered if try is successful. If try is unsuccessful, that's when the catch will be active. Catch will then take the responsibility of terminating the program, but it will decide what you are trying to do inside the catch block. Are you trying to looping and again try again, try again, try again? You are trying to put this inside the while loop, or you are trying to terminate. It's a coder who decides, developer decides, right? But in the long story short, catch block, you are writing the code that you are trying to handle them with. If this fails, do something. That's the code you want to put here. That is how you would do try catch block. Other ways, you can simply throw the generic exception. There are two exceptions you can see. One is a throw, another one is throws. Throw and throws. Throws are the exception, that generic exception you are trying to throw, like throws exception, throws IO exception, like this. Any exception you want to throw, just throws. Throw exception is explicitly you are defining this exception to be thrown. So let's say you have some customized exception that you defined that is being extended from some other exception. Those are your customized exception. If something happens abruptly, you can just say, okay, if this happens, throw this exception. You are telling the compiler explicitly, do this exception if something happens unexpectedly. These are basically the theory of exception handling. Now, one final thing I want to tell you is what happens exactly in the exception process. You are entering some bad value or something that caused the exception to be happened. Then the exception object is created by JRE. JRE, Java Runtime Environment, is then going to look around your program to see, have you defined the handling way? It says, I found the exception, I need to throw the exception, but before I throw, I'm going to look if you are defining anywhere to handle the exception. Are you trying to handle the exception or not? It will look to your program first before it throws the exception. Before it throws the exception like this, it will look throughout your program if there's anything you are trying to handle those exceptions, or you are trying to handle with some explicitly throwing exception, or you are trying to just simply throw out the exception, or you haven't defined anything, right? If you haven't defined anything, not even this, not even this, if you haven't defined anything, it will throw its generic exception. If you define something, it will throw the exception that you wanted it to be thrown. If you have handling those exceptions, it will come to your try catch block, and since the try failed, it will go to the exception, this catch part. It will go to the catch part, and whatever you are telling it to do inside this block, this parenthesis through this parenthesis, this block is going to be triggered, and it will do exactly what you're telling the compiler to do in case of failure. That's how you would handle the exception, my friend. Okay, so that's how you would handle exception, and that is the main purpose, the exception handling. So in my next video, I'm going to show you how you would do some coding practice and how we can demonstrate this exception theory that we understood. And theoretically, if you could understand this much, this is going to really explain you enough that and will help you understand what the exception happens and when it happens, what happens when it happens. We will see more practices in our coming videos. There's another question that you will be asked during your interviews is, tell me difference about final, finally, and finalize. Finally is the part of the block, just like the catch block here. You can add the finally block to smoothly terminate the exception. Terminate already happened, but what you want to do afterwards, you want to close the database, you want to do something, you can have those actions also in case of catch block. At the end, finally always come at the end. It can never be before the catch block. So finally is part of the exception. Finalize is part of the garbage collection. That is the method that garbage collector, the JVM, is going to trigger in case it needs to trash some object that is no longer in use. You have a class object for any class that you used, and those are no longer usable. Each of this object is taking your memory, heap memory, which is called those memory space. In order to run more program, you need to free up those space. In order to free, Java has its own terminology that is called garbage collection. Garbage collections will collect the garbage. This object that is no longer in use called garbage. Those garbage will be collected by garbage collector. Before it collects that as a garbage, it will invoke the finalize method. That's the main thing. Finalize is. So finalize is for garbage collector. Finally is for try catch block, that is part of the exception handling. And final is the keyword that is used in the class. It could be in the variable, it could be in the method. Purpose of final means the keyword is that you can never redefine. That's the main thing, that these three things are being used. I believe the time is almost there. So for this video, theoretically, I believe you understood quite well. I'm going to upload another video to show you more in the coding on the exception handling. And thank you very much for your all support that you have been supporting on my channel by subscribing and watching my videos. Please continue to do so, and please support my channel. Thank you for watching this video. We will see in the next round of exception handling video. Thank you for watching.